What's up guys, it's Rowan here from Artismart TV. Are you studying HSC Economics and struggling in working out how to write that Band 6 economics essay? Look, there's good news. While it might not seem like it, just like in English, there is really key structures and I'm going to say it, even a formula that you can use that will help you write a killer Band 6 economics essay. Now, I've taught economics for over a decade, including state ranking students and countless Band 6ing students. So what I'm going to share with you today is what I've seen work as a key formula and approach that you can use to write a Band 6 economics essay. Now, we're going to cover a lot of things from using DPEAL as a framework and how to integrate stats and more. So let's jump in and find out how you can write that Band 6 economics essay. So step number one in writing a killer economics essay is actually planning your response. Honestly, from marking thousands of papers, the biggest issue that I see is students not planning their response. If you don't have a good plan, it doesn't matter how brilliant some of your ideas are or some of the stats you use are, if it's not cohesive, it doesn't matter. So often when I read papers, the biggest thing that I see as an issue is a structural issue. You know, maybe the question's been approached in the wrong way, or the chronology throughout the paper or the response is not the best way to handle the question. And so most of my feedback is often structural, and that is solved through actually planning your response. So how do you plan your response? It's pretty simple. There's a couple of basic things you want to do at. Number one, you want to analyze the question. Look at the question and go, what's the verb? Get your head around the verb. Is it analyze? Is it examine? Is it discuss? Because that's going to influence the level of depth you go into. Secondly, is it a double-barreled question? Does it have two parts? Does it have like an outline and then a discuss, or an examine and then an analyze, right? How will that influence the way in which you structure your piece? Now, once you've done that, I want you to write a thesis statement down, a 1 to 2 sentence response to the question. That keeps it nice and simple so that you've got an idea of where you're going to take this question, how you're going to plan for it. Once you've got your 1 to 2 sentence thesis statement down, what I want you to now do is sort of take a step back and go, great, okay, how am I going to approach this? Am I going to approach this in supporting evidence in a chronological way, in a linear way, so maybe a time frame, or am I going to look at this through the lens of policies? Or am I going to look at this through the lens of economic issues? Or am I going to look at this through the lens of conflicts? So how are you going to structure your paragraphs in such a way that support most effectively your thesis statement in answering the question? And what I want you to do is I want you to write this down, and you should end up with essentially a bunch of dot points, right? A thesis statement, and then the key ideas that you're going to talk about in the order in which you're going to talk about them, with some dot points underneath of the things that you might raise. Now, once you have this, honestly, the rest of writing this essay is going to come together really, really easily. But you've got to nail this planning step first. Super, super critical. So step number 2 to writing a killer HSC Economics essay is to write your introduction. And honestly, from marking hundreds and thousands of HSC Economics essays over the last 10 years, one of the things that I've got to a point in my experience is I can look at an introduction, I kid you not, and look at it and tell you if it's going to be a Band 5 or 6. Because there's certain things that a good introduction does that also sets up the rest of the essay. And so by reading the intro, it's going to tell myself, but of course your teachers and the HSC markers, a huge amount about the rest of your essay. Also, if a marker's under timed constraints, and they often are, they've got to mark a lot for the HSC in a fairly quick period of time, the intro is the first thing they see. First impressions count, right? Yes, you might have brilliance later on, but if you don't make the best first impression through your introduction, it's hard because you're really having to, play catch up throughout the rest of your essay. So that's why, writing intros and good intros are really important, but what do they include? Well, simply put, you want to include your thesis statement, and you want to start with your thesis statement. What's the argument that you're going to be making in relation to the question? And that's really critical. Make sure it actually connects to the question. Often one of my most common feedback for introductions is, I'm not sure how you're answering the question. There's great stuff in here, but it's not answering the question. So really critically, what you want to do as a first task is write 1 to 2 sentence answer that responds directly to the question. Nail that, get that right. That's the first thing that you need to put in your introduction. Now, the second thing is there might be some key terms in the essay question that you should define. So make sure that you define a couple of the key terms as relevant in your introduction, although you need to be aware sometimes it could have a lot of key terms or imply, like if it's economic objectives, you don't probably in that case want to go and define all of the economic objectives in your introduction. All of a sudden your introduction will become way too long and it's doing more of the work that a paragraph should do. So just be judicial in your choice of which terms you will define from the question in your introduction. Now, once you've done that, it's really critical to have a little bit of context, and current context is really helpful. So maybe that's if it was an essay on economic growth, it might be the recent economic growth trends. If it was an essay on fiscal policy, it might be the current budget. Is it a surplus or a deficit? If it was one on external stability, the size of the CAD, for example. So what's a bit of recent context that is relevant, that sets the scene for this essay? Really, really important. Now, of course, critically, and this is where I see a lot of students go wrong, you also need to identify what the arguments are you're going to raise to support your thesis. What are the points you're going to make? And really, your introduction should tell the marker exactly how you're going to be structuring and approaching the essay itself. So that's why I can read an introduction and go, yes, I know this is going to be an amazing essay, if the introduction has shown me that. So you want to be able to identify, well, here are the main points I'm going to be raising in relation to supporting this thesis for this question. What that tells me is essentially the paragraphs and the content that you are going to be including and discussing. So if I have a marking criteria next to me and I've got certain things I'm expecting to see in this essay, I'm already ticking them off in my mind from the introduction. Instead of getting into the body of your essay, not knowing what I'm going to get and having to sort of go and search for it and find it. And you never want that to happen. You want it to be clear and easy for the marker to see the key points you're going to be talking about. Now, the final thing that you might do in your introduction is that you might raise a brief sort of criticism or limitation. And that's because ultimately economics is about thinking critically, and the best way to show that you understand, the real world economy and you're engaging with it is to be critical of it, is to be critical of maybe a policy or a conflict that exists between economic objectives, future ramifications of an issue. And so what you want to do is maybe highlight the negative or the limitations that you're going to raise as well. Now that'll depend on the question, but that's usually a really strong sign, an introduction, that you've got a Band 6 essay that is following. So step number 3, writing your paragraph for your economics essay. Well, there's a great little acronym you can use here, and it's sort of similar to the one that you might be familiar with in English. And this one's called DPEAL. So let's break down what each of these stand for, because ultimately, just like writing a good English paragraph for your essay structurally, the same thing can happen for your economics essay. So D stands for definition. Given the point that you're going to be talking about in this paragraph, are there any key definitions that you need to include? And this is all based on the assumption that you need to operate on, that the marker is actually a layperson. What that means is that they don't understand economics, and so you need to write the paragraph in such a way so that even someone who is not familiar with economics could read it and understand it. And so that starts with a definition. So, if you're writing a paragraph about economic growth or the environment or inflation, you might be including your definition as a starting point at the beginning of your paragraph. Now, the second part of our framework or formula is P, right, which stands for point. And that's actually to tell the marker what's the point you're arguing in this paragraph. How does this point support your overall thesis statement that you have raised in your introduction? Now, this is really critical because, as a marker, you're going to look for this at the start of a paragraph to give you the indication that the paragraph is relevant and related to the question. So you can also sort of tick off like, great, yep, they've covered this point that I was looking for. Now, often in practice, D and P are not necessarily two separate things. They often will end up becoming maybe the single first or second sentence combined. So you don't need to be religiously following, one thing and then the next, right? In terms of definition and then point. They can intermingle and they can change, but you want both of these up front at the beginning of your paragraph. Really, really critical. Now we go on to E, and E is to explain. The first E is to explain. And this is now where you need to talk about the theory. So you've made your point, you've got a definition, you've now got to explain how it works. What's the theory that can explain that relationship? So this is a great opportunity. If it was economic growth, you might be talking about, the theory of aggregate demand. You might include some diagrams and some graphs in here as well that show, the aggregate demand and maybe changes in aggregate demand. So the critical thing here is you want to be including an explanation of the theory, and you want to include diagrams and graphs. Now, the final E here is evidence. And this is where it's not good enough just to talk about theory. And a lot of Band 5 responses tend to stop here. They don't have enough evidence, they have a lot of explain. A Band 6 response will include a lot of evidence. And that's where you find examples from the economy, statistics, case studies that you can bring in to show that it's not just in theory this thing exists, but also in practice this is how it works. And so that way you can show the market that you can apply the theory to the real world, which is a critical skill for economics. So that's what the second E stands for. The second E stands for actually, implying evidence in your response. Now, the final thing here is linking. Now, linking / limitations. And that's the final step in the framework. Now, limitations, are there any limitations here that need to be considered? Are there any things that maybe there's a conflict in policy, maybe the policy sucks, maybe there's an issue for economic growth, if that's what we're talking about? Identify any limitations, and then of course link. And link is how you wrap up your paragraph and you show by relinking it to your thesis statement that you're answering the question. Now, really, really great Band 6 responses though in link do one little step even further. And that little step even further is that they actually also try to link it to the next paragraph. So it doesn't seem like a collection of mini essays, each paragraph standing alone. Instead, they all flow together. And so that's what a really great Band 6 essay will do in that final sentence or two, is they will not only highlight some limitations and link it back to the question, they'll also link this paragraph to the next paragraph as well. So there you have it. That's how you can write a killer paragraph for your economics essay using the D-Peel framework. So step number 4 in writing a killer HSC economics essay is to write a conclusion. And conclusions are one of those things that I feel like a lot of people struggle with, because what do you do? Is it exactly like your intro? How is it different? Super simple. You're going to, number 1, restate your thesis statement. So just remind the marker of what your key argument has been in the essay. Secondly, just identify the key points that you've made. So remind the marker here, this is what I've actually spoken about to support this argument. Finally, you want to zoom out. And zoom out is to sort of look at bigger picture, look at the question, look at the bigger picture, and this is your opportunity really to shine. Only the really top Band 6 responses do this, and this is essentially where you can maybe identify some future trends that weren't the scope of this question necessarily, but are relevant, and it's something to be mindful of maybe there's future policy implications that you can reference. So it's about thinking ahead, it's thinking bigger picture and leaving the marker with a little bit of, this something that shows that you know your stuff even beyond the question's scope. And you want to show that you know it and it's relevant. So that's just a little, icing on top, the little cherry that'll really set your conclusion apart. Now, ultimately though, a conclusion should not be long. 3 to 4 sentences max. You don't want to overstay your welcome. Just get there and be really disciplined in smashing those points out, because you'll often as well be running tight of time. And so that way you've just got a really strong, well-constructed conclusion that gets the marks. So there you have it, guys. That is how you write a killer HSC economics conclusion. So that's it, guys. That is how you write a Band 6 HSC economics essay. The good news is, as I promised at the start, there is a formula that you can use to write a Band 6 response. If you have any questions about it, leave a comment below. Myself or one of the incredible HSC economics tutoring team at ArtistSmart will answer your questions below. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We do videos every single week, so I will see you next week.